I was tired, but the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from doing something that matters. My sister's knee surgery had gone well, and I had spent 3 weeks in Tucson helping her through the worst of recovery. I remember sitting on the plane home to Savannah, watching the Georgia coastline appear through the window, thinking how lucky I was. 31 years of marriage. A house I had helped pick out, helped furnish, helped turn into something that felt like a life. My husband Dennis and I had been through everything together, the miscarriage we never talked about, the years when money was tight enough that we ate soup 4 nights a week, the moment our daughter Claire walked across a stage to collect her diploma, and we both cried harder than she did. I got off the plane with a rolling suitcase and a box of his favorite almond cookies from the bakery near my sister's house. I had texted him from the airport. No reply. I figured he was busy. The cab pulled up to the house at 7:15 in the evening. The lights were on inside. I could see the flicker of the television through the front window. I paid the driver, pulled my suitcase up the front walk, and reached for my key. It did not work. I tried again. Turned it the other direction. Tried a third time. The lock was the same lock, same brass color, same shape, but the key did not fit. I stood there for a moment, confused in the way you get confused when something simple suddenly stops making sense. I knocked. Dennis opened the door. He was wearing the gray sweater I had given him for his birthday 2 years ago, and he looked at me the way you look at someone you were not expecting. Not surprised, exactly. More like braced. "Carol," he said. "My key doesn't work," I said, and I held it up as if that explained everything, as if showing him the proof of the problem would make it resolve itself. He stepped slightly to the left, and that is when I saw her. She was standing in the entrance to the kitchen, wearing my mother's blue cardigan. The one with the small pearl buttons my mother had brought back from a trip to Charleston 40 years ago, the one I had folded and kept in the cedar chest at the foot of our bed. She was holding a glass of wine, and she looked maybe 35, and she looked at me with an expression I can only describe as pitying. "Dennis," I said. "Who is she?" He did not answer immediately. He ran his hand through his hair the way he always did when he was uncomfortable, and then he said, "I should have called. I know I should have called. But Carol, things have changed." I asked him to explain what that meant. He did. It took about 4 minutes. 22 months, he said. They had been together 22 months. He had changed the locks last week. He was filing for divorce. The house was in his name, which was true, a decision we had made 30 years ago for tax reasons that no longer applied. He was sorry. He really was sorry. I stood on my own front porch with my suitcase and a box of almond cookies, and I listened to my husband explain that my life was over. I asked about the cardigan. I asked him to at least have her take off my mother's cardigan. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything. She turned and walked back into the kitchen. She did not take the cardigan off. He brought me a garbage bag from inside the house. He had already packed some of my things, he said. Clothes, mostly. My toiletries. He had been planning to ship the rest, he said. Once everything was sorted out, he was sorry. He said that 3 more times. I counted. I took the garbage bag. I walked to the end of the driveway and I stood there under the streetlight while he closed the door. And I listened to the deadbolt turn. And the night was warm the way Savannah nights are warm, even in October. Heavy and fragrant. And I could hear music from somewhere down the street, and I thought, 31 years. I walked to the park 2 blocks over and sat on a bench. A man was walking a dog. A couple was laughing at something on a phone screen. The world was conducting its business entirely without my input. I opened my purse and looked at what I had. $61 in cash. My credit cards, but Dennis and I shared accounts, and I had no idea what that meant now, what he could freeze, what I could still access. My phone was at 42%. I had my sister's number, but my sister was 3 weeks out of knee surgery in Tucson, and I could not ask her to solve this. I had nowhere to go. I sat on that bench for a long time. The dog walker came back around. He noticed me still sitting there but was too polite to say anything. I appreciated that more than I can explain. At some point I started going through my purse the way you do when you are not looking for something specific, just touching familiar things. Lip balm, a pen, the small folding mirror I have carried since I was 25. And then, in the inside zipper pocket where I kept things I did not want to lose, my fingers found something I had not thought about in years. It was a business card. Thick stock, cream-colored, slightly soft at the corners from age. My father's name was printed across the center in plain block letters. Beneath it, Henderson Precision Components, and a phone number with a Nashville area code, and a title I had never fully understood while he was alive. Director of Applied Engineering. My father had died 11 years ago. He had been an engineer his entire working life, quiet, methodical, the kind of man who kept graph paper notebooks and spent his weekends in the garage building things that mostly did not work and occasionally worked spectacularly. He had been with Henderson Precision for over 2 decades, and when he died, we had gone through his things and found the usual: insurance papers, a small retirement account, the house in Nashville that my mother still lived in. There had been some talk from the company, a letter. I remembered a letter about certain rights being transferred, but my mother had handled all of it, and I had been so consumed with grief and with the logistics of everything that I had not paid close attention. I held the card in the streetlight and looked at my father's name, and I thought about something he had told me once, when I was maybe 14. We were in the garage, and he was working on something I did not understand, adjusting a small mechanism with a precision I found almost frightening. "Most people think the small things don't matter," he said, not looking up from what he was doing. "But the small things are the only things that last." I did not know why I remembered that in that moment, but I put the card in my jacket pocket, and I picked up my garbage bag, and I walked to a motel on the edge of town. The next morning I called my mother. She was 79 and still sharp, still living in the Nashville house, still keeping a crossword puzzle dictionary on the kitchen table. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said several things about Dennis that I will not repeat here, and then she said, "Carol, did you ever follow up with the company?" I asked her which company. "Henderson Precision," she said. "When your father died, they sent a letter about some kind of licensing arrangement. I signed what they asked me to sign because I didn't understand it and I was grieving, and the lawyer said it was just a formality, but I kept a copy. I always keep copies." I asked her what the letter said. She took a few minutes to find it. I listened to her walking through the house, heard the sound of the filing cabinet drawer in the small office off the kitchen, heard her putting on her reading glasses. Then she read it to me. It was full of technical language, but the core of it was this: my father had been the lead inventor on a series of patents related to precision measurement components used in industrial manufacturing. The patents had been filed jointly between my father and the company, and upon his death, his share had passed to his estate. There was a royalty structure. There was a licensing clause. My mother had signed a form continuing the arrangement. The royalties, she said, had been going into an account she barely touched because she did not need the money she had, her pension, her Social Security, the house. She had assumed it was a few $100s a year. She had not looked carefully. I asked her to look at the most recent statement. She was quiet for a long time. "Carol," she said, "I think you need to come to Nashville." I borrowed $200 from my mother over the phone, wired to my account within the hour, and I bought a bus ticket. The Henderson Precision Regional Office was on the south side of Nashville, a low glass building set back from the road behind a parking lot full of pickup trucks and sedans. I walked in on a Tuesday morning with my father's business card in my hand, and I asked to speak with whoever handled licensing agreements. The woman at the reception desk looked at the card, looked at me, and picked up her phone. They brought out a man named Gerald Watts. He was in his late 50s, gray at the temples, wearing a company polo shirt, and when he saw my father's name on the card and I told him who I was, something shifted in his face. Not alarm, exactly. More like the careful recalibration of a man who has just understood that a conversation he did not expect to have is now happening. He brought me into a conference room. He brought water. He brought a folder. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, "I want to be straightforward with you. Your father's patents, specifically the series filed between 1987 and 1994 on microtolerance calibration mechanisms, have become significantly more relevant in recent years. Precision manufacturing has had something of a renaissance with the growth of aerospace components and medical device production. The licensing fees generated by those patents over the past decade have been substantial." I looked at him. "How substantial?" He opened the folder. He turned it toward me. I had to read the number twice. Gerald Watts watched me read it twice, and he did not say anything, because he understood that some moments require silence. The royalties paid out over the last 10 years alone were more than Dennis and I had made combined in our entire working lives. The patents still had 12 years of protection remaining on the most recent filing. The account my mother had barely touched had been accumulating for 11 years. "We have actually been trying to reach the estate," Gerald said carefully. "There is an ongoing licensing negotiation with a consortium of manufacturers that would significantly increase the annual payments. We needed authorization from the estate's representative to proceed." I thought about my mother signing a form she did not understand while she was grieving. I thought about a filing cabinet in Nashville full of statements she had not opened. I thought about standing on a porch with a garbage bag while a woman in my mother's cardigan turned and walked back into my kitchen. "I would like to retain an attorney," I said, "before we discuss anything further." Gerald Watts nodded. "Of course," he said. "That is entirely appropriate." I called my mother that evening from her kitchen table. She sat across from me with her crossword dictionary and a cup of tea and listened while I explained what Gerald Watts had told me. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Your father always said those patents would matter someday. I thought he meant to him. I did not understand he meant to us." I found an attorney named Patricia Okafor who specialized in intellectual property estates. She was thorough and unhurried, and she had the manner of someone who had seen every variety of situation and found each of them interesting. She reviewed the original agreements my mother had signed, the royalty statements, the pending licensing negotiation, the full scope of what the patents represented. It took her 3 weeks to complete her review. When we met in her office, she set her reading glasses on the desk and folded her hands and said, "Carol, your father was more careful than anyone in his life seems to have known." The joint filing structure was designed, I believe, deliberately so that his share would pass clearly and cleanly to his heirs. The company has been paying royalties in good faith, but the new licensing consortium deal, if authorized and structured correctly, would more than triple the annual payments. You and your mother are the estate's representatives. You have full authority to negotiate. I sat with that for a moment. "And what is the value?" I asked, "if the negotiation goes through?" She told me. "I thought about the bench in the park at night. $61, 42% battery. My mother's blue cardigan with the pearl buttons that was still, for all I knew, hanging in my former house, being worn by a woman whose name I had not yet asked." I authorized Patricia Okafor to proceed. While she negotiated, I hired a different attorney to handle the divorce. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was recommended by Patricia as someone who did not waste time. I gave him everything I had: the dates of the marriage, the assets I could document, the house that was in Dennis's name, but which I had contributed to financially for 31 years. Dennis had filed first, which he seemed to think gave him some advantage. Marcus Webb explained that it did not. The licensing negotiation concluded in 4 months. The consortium signed. The first payment under the new structure arrived in the estate account in February. The divorce was finalized the following spring. Marcus Webb was not the kind of attorney who gloated, but at our last meeting, he did allow himself a small smile and said that Dennis's attorney had been surprised by the final settlement terms. I can only imagine what surprised looked like. Dennis had assumed he was divorcing a woman with $61 and a garbage bag of clothes. He had not known about my father's notebooks, or the garage in Nashville, or the small mechanism that had been quietly and patiently mattering for 30 years. He did not get the house. I did not want it. We sold it. My share of the proceeds went into an account I opened in my own name. I want to tell you about 2 things I did with the money, because I think they matter. The first thing was small. I drove back to Savannah. I called Dennis and I told him I was coming to collect the rest of my belongings, and that I would be bringing a witness, and that I expected the process to be orderly. He agreed. I arrived on a Saturday morning with Marcus Webb's paralegal and a rental van. She answered the door. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and she looked at me with less confidence than she had at our first meeting. I did not go through the house. I had Marcus Webb's paralegal document what was mine based on the list I had prepared. Furniture, books, the photographs I wanted, the kitchen items I had brought from my own mother's house years ago. And on the way out, I stopped at the coat closet. I opened it. The blue cardigan with the pearl buttons was hanging on the third hook. I took it off the hook and I folded it over my arm and I walked out. Nobody said a word. The second thing was larger. My father had spent his career making things with precision. Measuring, adjusting, calibrating, getting the small things right so that the larger things would work. He had done it in a garage, alone, without recognition, while the world moved on to other concerns. He had left behind no memoir, no public legacy, no building with his name on it. He had left behind a series of patents and a daughter who had not known until she sat on a park bench with a garbage bag and $61, how much that was worth. I bought a building in Nashville, 2 miles from the house where I grew up, an old manufacturing warehouse that had been empty for years. Brick and tall windows, the kind of structure that used to make things and had forgotten how. I hired an architect and a contractor and a program director. We spent 14 months renovating it. It is a workshop and education center now. Precision fabrication, applied engineering, mechanical design for high school students who cannot afford the programs that exist elsewhere. There are 47 benches. Each bench has its own set of tools, calibrated and organized the way my father would have organized them. There is a room in the back with a small exhibit about what precision manufacturing is, why it matters, who does it, and what it makes possible. On the wall near the entrance, there is a framed photograph of my father standing in his garage. He is holding something small in his hands and looking at it with an expression I spent most of my life not knowing how to name. I can name it now. It is the expression of someone who understands that the small things last. Beneath the photograph, a small brass plate. In memory of Raymond Whitfield, engineer, 1941, 2013. He believed the small things mattered. My mother came to the opening. She stood in front of that photograph for a long time. She did not say anything. She reached out and straightened the frame, which did not need straightening, just to have something to do with her hands. There are things I want you to know. If you are watching this and you are at a park bench or something like it, $61 or something like it, a door that no longer opens for you, your father or your mother or someone who loved you, they may have left something small behind. A notebook, a box in a closet, a card in the inside pocket of a purse. Something that seemed like nothing, something no one thought to look at closely. The world moves fast, and it does not pause to explain what it is leaving at your feet. I was 62 years old when I sat on that bench. I had 31 years of a life that had just been handed back to me in a garbage bag. I did not feel strong. I felt the way cold concrete feels hard, flat, without warmth. But I had my father's card, and I knew his name, and it turned out that was enough to begin with. Dennis and I have not spoken since the divorce was finalized. I do not have feelings about this that I can easily describe, except to say that when I am standing in that building in Nashville, watching a 15-year-old learn to calibrate a mechanism for the first time, with the careful, wondering expression of someone discovering that precision is actually possible, I do not think about Dennis at all. I think about a man in a garage in Nashville, working on something small that no one else thought mattered. I think about how right he was.